Zoom, golly golly. All right. I think we're ready to start. Is everybody here? I think I lost everybody. Oh no, okay, we're good. Okay. Hello and welcome to the Parsha class. We are in the midst of a series called Taam, Dagan, learning the rules of food and eating and etiquette and dieting and nutrition that can be found in the Torah. Many rules about food in the Torah, of course. And one would think that last week's Parsha, especially Parsha Re'eh, had really the bulk of the main laws. We had this different species of animals that are kosher and not kosher, the prohibition against meat and milk, the importance of eating foods that bring joy on the holidays, a lot of different topics in last week's Parsha. You think there's really nothing left for the Torah to talk about in terms of these rules, right? You would be wrong, because here we have Baruch Hashem and Shoftim, quite a few things to share, God willing, that we'll start with right now. Let's share the screen. Um, so Parshat Shoftim deals with the rules of the Jewish people when they enter the land of Israel. And amongst other things, they have to create a court, and the court needs to have judges, right? Obviously, and the judges need to be fair. Mishpat lo takir panim lo tikach shochad ki shochad yaver eine chachamim v'yisalev divrei tzadikim. The shochad, the bribe, the gift that is given to a judge, is given to anybody in really a power of authority or supervision of any sort, has the potential to create conflict, because once you give a bribe, it changes the relationship. Take for example, uh, especially in the food industry, when it comes to food, we want our food to be kosher, and the kosher food is supervised by a mishkiach. Let's say the mishkiach at a restaurant is buddy buddy with the owner, and and really cares more for the owner's success than for the veracity of the kashrut of the establishment. That can happen. How do you avoid that kind of thing from happening? So the different kashrut organizations actually have systems in place to avoid that happening, and that we don't want mashgichim to get free gifts, food or whatever, money, obviously, or other kinds of benefits of their supervision. So it happens to be that to prevent their mashgichim, their kosher supervisors, from taking bribes, large kosher agencies, uh, uh, hold on a second, have systems in place. This is why we do this. Uh, for rotating mashgichim, paying them independently, having surprise inspections, maintaining strong rabbinic oversight. In other words, the mashgiach isn't the last word in whether something's kosher. The mashgiach needs to answer to something. Besides the fact, by the way, it's worth noting, it should also be on this list. But besides the fact that the mashgichim are partially hired because of their reputation for ethical honesty, right? So that's part of it. That somebody who's hiring a mashgiach might hire somebody who's shomer Shabbat only, but shomer Shabbat only doesn't mean that the person is a trustworthy person. If the person has a history of lying, of legal problems, of whatever else, that could be reason to suspect the mishgiach. And obviously, a large kashrut organization would not hire such a person to be a mashgiach to begin with. But besides that, rotating mashgichim, paying them independently, having surprise inspections, maintaining strong rabbinic oversight, establishing electronic logging and monitoring, And so technology nowadays is a big thing for these big organizations. That's the OU, the Kaf Kaf K, sorry, Kaf K, and the Star K, CRC. These kinds of organizations, they do these things, and they also have ethics training that's mandatory for a lot of these mashgichim. And on the subject of having these mishkichim in place, having authority, we come up to the topic that's a very important topic in kashrut. So chapter 17, verse 9 and 11, both talk about this idea of uvata el hakohanim halavim el hashofet asher yeh bayamim hahem. You have to go to the Leviim, to the Kohanim, and the judges that you have in your day. You have to ask them. They give you the answer of what to do at Davar HaMishpat, what the law is. And there's, like I said, there's another verse, chapter 17, verse 11 says pretty much the same thing, that you have to listen to them. You can't ignore them. You can't turn yaminu small, left or right from what they told you to do. There's quite a bit to listen to there. And how does that fit in? What does that have to do with food? Well, it is always important to get the most current rabbinic responsa. When it comes to what's kosher, what's not kosher, well, it used to be kosher. I get this question very often. Used to be in the 1950s and 1960s. The rabbi said, look at what it says on the label on the can, and once you know what's in there, you'll know if it's kosher or not. In terms of ingredients, that might be true. But what you also have to consider is that in terms of kashrut, very important topic would be that it's not just ingredients that make something kosher. It's also the process in which something is made. Was it Bishul Yisrael? Was a Jewish person involved in the cooking? What ovens were used? Were these kosher pots and pans, ovens? What was going on there? It happens to be nowadays it's much more complicated than it used to be. It used to be there were sort of dedicated factories that made certain foods, and they didn't make anything else. Nowadays, that's not the case. Nowadays, we have basically these things called ghost kitchens, where you have in the same kitchen multiple things being made at different times. So you'll have one place I was looking to get supervised here in San Diego. They made jam. So jam is an easy thing to supervise. They're very close to giving them a hechsher, and then the problem was that they only used the kitchen. Let's say it was Wednesday and Friday. And Tuesday and Thursday, that kitchen is used by another company that uses the same ovens to make pork back ribs. Right? So obviously now the oven is going to be an issue. And even if they don't use the same oven, they're going to be washing the dishes. Different dishes, same dishes. How are we going to separate the dishes? Is the mashgiach going to be there all the time to supervise this? Do they need a mashgiach all the time? This becomes a big issue, and this is something that companies deal with before they get kosher certification, and also answers the question that many people have: why are some certifications better or worse than others? And the answer is, frankly, because the certification is sometimes not very careful about some of these things, sometimes for halachic or philosophical reasons. You can say perhaps there's a leniency that they can rely on, but the current rabbinic psak halacha, the current rabbinic responsa, is what we have to use in order to decide whether something is kosher or not. So I've written here, there are situations of foods that were considered kosher in the past that are no longer considered permitted to be eaten. Raspberries provide a case in point. Raspberry is a great example. Most religious Jews used to consume raspberries in the past. So what changed to prohibit raspberries today? Why is it that some people think that raspberries are not kosher? So according to the rabbinic leadership, and that's the key here, the rabbinic leadership of most kashrut organizations, and they all have rabbinic leadership. It's not like they're just private companies that make decisions based on on the bottom line. They make decisions based on halacha, and they have halachists. They have poskim who deal with these kinds of things for them. Rabbi Ganak at the OU, etc. So, according to these authorities, this is due to the high rate of infestation from mites, thrips, and worms found in these berries, and the technological difficulties of cleaning them out sufficiently. And that's an issue. Maybe you could say maybe earlier, maybe in the past, these berries didn't used to have this kind of infestation problem. Maybe we didn't know. Maybe there was just a lack of knowledge about these things. Maybe because we didn't have, or maybe, like I said, maybe there were other issues that you haven't considered. Maybe the pesticides that were used then, those quote unquote unhealthy pesticides that were used in the 1950s and 60s, maybe they kept these bugs at bay then, and raspberries were no problem. So there's what to consider in these cases. It's worth remembering, and I think we've mentioned this in a previous class. The Ben Ish Chai, uh, famously on his commentary on the Gemara in Pesachim, where it talks about the idea that the ideal form of maror is lettuce, is romaine lettuce. He asks, why don't people nowadays usually use romaine lettuce? Nowadays is 150 years ago in Iraq, right? For him, so he says nowadays people are concerned with using lettuce because of all the bugs, because of the toalim, the worms and the bugs, the ants, the thrips, the aphids that were in bugs already then were the reason why and the difficulty in washing these things out that they had back then. They didn't have the same soaps that we have now. They didn't have the technology that we have of finding those kinds of bugs easily with the thrip cloth method, the light box, the loop, etc. So that's why they didn't. Many people were already not using romaine lettuce as maror already back then in the 1850s. All right. I don't have very much written here, but there's more I'd like to say on this topic. Give me just a quick moment to set this up. Um, Here we go. Baruch Hashem. Okay. Um, okay. Um, there's a gift that has to be given to the Kohanim, and chapter 18, verse 3 mentions that beyond the fact that they don't get the land, there is a mitzvah. It's actually um, the 500. Okay, hold on. I thought I had this all written up and organized. Do. Okay, that's not it. Sorry, give me a moment. There it is. Yeah. So the positive mitzvah 506, the 506th mitzvah of 613 mitzvot is this mitzvah of v'natan lekohen uh, zroa v'halachaim v'hakeva. The two cheeks, the mouth, the jaw, the maw, and the shoulder. Those were all given to the kohen as a gift. Now that happens to be a mitzvah. It is a mitzvah for the person who slaughters the meat to give as a gift to the Kohen these three parts. That's the jaw, the maw, and the shoulder. Those best parts of the animal, sort of, were supposed to be given to a Kohen. It happens to be that it's preferable to distribute these to several Kohanim and not to focus on any one particular person. But and also important to know that a Torah scholar, a Kohen who happens to be a Torah scholar, should receive preference in receiving this gift. Um, uh, the Kohen is permitted to do whatever he wants with this gift. He can give it to his unmarried daughter as a gift to give to her non-Kohen husband, future husband, right? And it can also be given to the wife or the widow of a Kohen. And it's interesting. It's not very clear whether the Levi has to do this as well, or whether it's only for the Israel. It's also interesting that the rabbis in the Talmud in Chulin 130a referred to this gift. And they say it in the order in which to bring blessings to those parts of a person necessary for eating. So there's what think about it. The shoulder, you need your arm to get the food. That you need the cheeks, you need your jaw, and that's the order that the food sort of enters your body, the first stages, and that's why it seems to be the order that's told in. Okay. Um, so next verse talks about another gift that we give. Reshit degancha v'tirochcha v'tzarecha v'reshit gaz tzoncha titen lo. You have to give him the first of your corn, your wine, your that's how they're translating degancha is corn. It's interesting, but it's your grain. Um, yeah, I'm gonna change that here. I don't like that it says corn. Corn was not a crop used in the new in Europe until 1492. So that would have been strange for them to be using corn. But anyway, the first fruits of your grain, your wine, your oil, the first of the fleece of your sheep, are all gifts to the coin, and that gift is called, by the way, truma. Very important phrase. Truma is used. There's first of all, there's a parsha called Truma. We'll talk about that when we get to it. It's God willing in Sefer Shemot. Meanwhile, though, um, Truma is a gift given to the Kohen. There's a lot to say about it. Although the exact amount is not given by the Torah, the rabbis decided that the minimum one should give is 1/60th of one's grain. So it says, give your grain. So a little pebble of your grain should be enough according to the Torah level. The rabbis added on that there's a minimum, and that's supposed to be 1/60th of one's grain. There's even an opinion that one could designate truma merely by looking at it. You don't have to say this is going to be the truma. You can just think it. That's an interesting halacha. The determination regarding whether to take truma or not from a vegetable, um, yeah, that's or not depends on what the purpose of that vegetable's use once it is fully prepared is. It depends on what the purpose is. Sorry, of that vegetable's use once it is fully prepared. In other words, what's going to be done with this? So, for example, the example that's given in the Gemara is dill, right? So, dill is not a food that's eaten by itself. It's sort of a garnish, or it sort of spices something else. So, you don't have to give truma from dill, right? That sort of thing. One of the reasons given for rabbinic law, or the rabbinic law of Netilat Yadayim, right? Netilat Yadayim, such a core halacha that almost every Jewish child knows, right? It has to do with this week's parsha, because the rabbinic, the source of this is the problem of handling food such as bread and wet fruits and vegetables, is that truma has to be pure when it's given to the Kohanim. You can't have impure truma. Your truma needs to be pure. So you need to be pure. Your hands need to be pure. You wash your hands before you handle food, because that food might become the truma that you're giving to the Kohen. There's no problem of eating impure fruit if you're not pure, and we do it all the time, and we're not pure, and that's fine. But handling food that you might give to a Kohen, we need to purify ourselves somehow. And that's why we have this rule of Nitilat Yadayim. That's according to the Mishnah Brura, 158.2. Um, all right, the Talmud compares. Uh, sorry, we said this before. This next line is something we said previously, but it's worth repeating. The Torah requires one to always give the best, to teach generosity, the best of what they have, as a gift Um, the best of what you have. Sorry. Sorry for the delay. All right, to teach generosity. That's the more in Nevuchim. Like I said, we quoted that in the previous class as well. You'll find that very often. This idea that you have to give the best of what you have, and this teaches you generosity. The Talmud compares one who ate food from which truma was not taken to one who ate non-kosher food. That's how bad it is. According to the Rambam, it's even worse than eating non-kosher food. I should have had that there too as well. Perhaps this seriousness is the reason the truma can only become nullified in a ratio of 1 to 200. Usually, food to be nullified is in a ratio of 1 to 60. In other words, if uh, you have, say, just to make it simple, you have 60 ounces of kosher food and 1 ounce of non-kosher food mixed in there by accident. By the way, it can't be done on purpose. Ain't mevatlin Isser lichatchila. But if by accident some non kosher food fell in and it's the volume of it is less than 1 to 60, so the food is perfectly kosher. You can eat the food. Obviously, if you can still find that non kosher piece, you should take it out and throw it out, whatever. But meanwhile, that's the ratio for most things. For truma, it's a higher ratio. It's 1 to 200. So if there's one piece of truma that falls into a food that has 190 parts, 190 ounces, right, of non-truma, that food is still considered a truma food. That entire thing, the entire mixture. And truma is mentioned in between the two meats. If you look at the verse here, right? So we just talked about meat in verse 3, and another meat we're going to talk about in verse 5, right? So because they have certain halachic similarities in common with truma. In other words, they also have to be given in a state of purity, etc. I think that's who says that. I think that's Rav Chaim, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the Tamei Dekra. All right, next verse we're going to look at is chapter 18, verse 8. All right. Chelek chelek yochelu levad mimkarav al ha'avot. They should have similar portions to eat besides that which is his due according to his father's house. So both the Kohen and the Yisrael have to eat the parts of the sacrifice. Kederech malachim. They're supposed to eat them in a manner of royalty, with some sort of degree of respectfulness, decorum, etiquette. Right? They're not just supposed to eat like animals, and they're not supposed to eat like some some sort of like street food situation or barbecue. They're supposed to sit down. It's supposed to be nice. It's supposed to be well dressed. It's a ceremonial type thing. The next piece here, I think we're going to skip for now. There's a concept in halacha called kol kavua kemechza dami, and it deals with if you have food that is in a place where the majority is kosher or the majority is not kosher, that food follows after the majority if you don't know where you got that food from. There's, in other words, there's a piece of meat surrounded by butcher stores that are you know you bought it at one of those stores. You forgot which one, and one of those 10 butcher stores sells non-kosher food. You can assume that your food is that meat is from the kosher store. That comes actually from this week's Parsha. That's directly from this week's Parsha. The Gemara and actually the Shulchan Aruch also the Gemara in Ketubot quotes this verse about if somebody hates another person and rises up to try to kill them. So that it says he hates him, he tries to kill him. The phrase the word him is used twice, and that fact the Talmud uses to mean to exclude a case of a person sort of like throwing a rock into a crowd. In other words, it's definitely him he wants to kill. Only if it's him that he wants to kill does he get the death penalty. But if he just killed somebody by accident, just again, all of these are by accident because we're talking about a case where somebody killed somebody. Sorry. Just like an accidental killing sometimes has different kinds of punishments depending on whom you accidentally killed. So too, this is comparable to that case of a piece of meat that was purchased from an area where you weren't sure what the situation was with the meat. Um, and again, the opposite is also true. So if only the minority of the meat is kosher, the removed piece is only a doubtful prohibition and not assumed to be from the majority. Okay. And you can assume it's from the minority. Uh, yeah. All right. Like I said, that's a very technical thing. We can talk about it some other time, perhaps. Maybe in some of the parshiot that have less to do with food. We'll see. So there's another very important halacha in this week's parsha, chapter 19, verse 14, which doesn't seem to have anything to do with food. It says, "Lo tasig gvul re'echa," do not push your neighbor's boundary. Asher gavul rishonim v'nachalatcha, that the elders, the people of the earlier generations set up for your inheritance. Asher tenachal, that you're going to inherit be'eretz, in the land. Asher Hashem elokecha noten lecha l'rishta, that Hashem is going to give you to take possession of it. So it says in the Gemara in Shabbat 85a, that's something that the rabbis discovered, the rabbis came up with. This has a lot to do with what we said earlier about going to the rabbis, going to the current psak halacha of your day. But sometimes the rabbis come up with stuff, call it quote unquote scientifically. You can call it quasi scientifically, right? They've discovered something that wasn't mentioned in the Torah. Maybe it's because of technological advances. Maybe it's because of something that they noticed, but it wasn't mentioned in the Torah. Moshe didn't bring this down, but that can also be trusted. How do you know that you can trust the rabbis about that? Because of this verse. You cannot remove your neighbor's boundaries, which the early ones have set up. They set them up. They didn't. It wasn't in the Torah. It wasn't an established law. They set it up themselves, and that's still something we have to trust. What does that have to do with food? Good question. So, therefore, the rabbis. This is the Gemara still. The Gemara says that they determined that 5 species of vegetables planted in a 6 tefach garden. A tefach is a fistful, right? Fist width. So you've got a 6 tefachim. Let's say that's, what is that? That's about 2 feet, say. Okay. And if you have 5 different species of vegetables planted in that small garden, they're not going to receive nourishment from each other. That's enough of a space for these vegetables to not get nourishment from each other. Now, this has relevance in halacha in terms of the halachot of, for example, klayim, of forbidden mixtures. We're not supposed to make mixtures of vegetables, hybrid vegetables, and things like that. But there's relevance there. But again, the point is we can trust the rabbis about that even here, where it doesn't seem to be something from the Torah. It's something that we can still trust the rabbis about in the future. Okay, we're going to skip to the laws of making war. Now, you'll think this has nothing to do with food, but in fact, we'll have some very important halachot coming up. Chapter 20, verse 12 says, Im lo tashlim imach, v'asata imach milchama, etzarta aleha. If they will not want to make peace with you and want to make war with you, then you can tzarata aleha. You can besiege them. You can surround their city and basically force them out by making them want to leave. Why would they want to leave if you're surrounding their city? Unfortunately, we see it today. They starve, right? From starvation, they might give up and they might surrender. and that's and make peace finally. So the halacha is, and again, it's important to note we're not posking in halacha about the current war, but these are concepts that we need to know for ourselves. In times of war, we are allowed to cause our enemies to die of thirst. It's different than dying of hunger. The feelings of lacking drink and being satisfied from drink affect people differently than food. To get the most satiation from drinking wine, the Talmud, I believe this is the Talmud in Sukkah, yeah, suggests taking large gulps of wine, since the throat is where the satisfaction from wine is felt more effectively. Now, in other words, if you have very little wine but want the most satisfaction from it, or if you have very little to drink but you want to feel satisfied from it, gulp down a lot at once. This is not, by the way, a good idea in terms of hydration, by the way, or in terms of real satisfaction. But at least you feel. That's why we do it, right? When we're thirsty and we get a drink of water, we gulp it down because it feels satisfying. It feels good. That's what the Talmud is saying here. This is unlike food, right? This drinking is unlike food, which satisfies a person when it fills the stomach, right? You don't feel it. You can stuff all the food you want in your mouth. You won't feel satisfied until it hits your stomach. Drink is different. It feels satisfying when it hits your throat. This difference between drinking and eating may account, according to the Khatam Sofer, for the different amounts required to define eating and drinking. Is there a question? Sorry, thought I heard a voice. All right. So, in other words, we know that when it comes to the halachot of eating and drinking, we talked about this 2 weeks ago, I think. The minimum amount of food that's considered eating is 1.1 ounces, as opposed to drinking, which is called 3.3 ounces, right? That's considered the definition of eating and drinking. Why is there a difference between these amounts? It could be, that says the Khatam Sofer. I think it's the Khatam Sofer, and it is. The difference is because we have this because of the difference of how this food comes in and satisfies us. So that affects these amounts. Okay, 1 second. Okay, great. Um, Next verse we're going to look at is 7 verses down, chapter 20, verse 19. And this is going to be quite a lengthy discussion about a very important topic in halacha known as bal tashchit, or wasting food in particular. And we'll see how that fits into this week's parsha. It's the source for the halacha is this week's parsha. Very important concept in halacha. Kitatzur el ir yamim rabim, when you're besieging the city for many days. Hilachem alecha v'tafsa, and you're basically you're taking over it, right? Lo tashkit et eitza lindoach alav garzan. You're not allowed to destroy an animal. You're not allowed to destroy a tree from that area by chopping it down with an axe. Ki b'menu tochal. You're supposed to eat from them instead. That's it's food. It's a fruit tree, right? So you're supposed to eat from it. V'oto lo tichrot, and not cut it down. Famous phrase, ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh tavo mipanecha b'matzur, is a tree of the field, a man that you should besiege it. You're not besieging it. You should be besieging the people. So why are you bothering with the tree? So there's a lot to say on this. First, let's talk about the ethical side of things. We'll quote from Rav Shamson Raphael Hirsch, or paraphrase. The problem with cutting down a fruit tree is that the human condition relies on the produce of the soil. We need food. Why are you attacking the food? Therefore, cutting down the fruit tree of a besieged city is forbidden, because destroying the tree would destroy the person who relies on it for nourishment. Just a moment. Sorry. Um, Therefore, cutting down the tree of a besieged city is forbidden because destroying the tree would destroy the person who relies on it. We're not trying to kill the people. We're trying to like force them into peace. We don't want them to die. So killing the tree is really like killing the people directly, and that's not something we want to be doing. Um, to talk about the halachic aspects here for a moment, we must not destroy a fruit tree since that would be wasteful. I think the Malbim writes that. Yeah, indeed he does. A fruit tree that no longer produces edible fruit, though, or that produces fruit of inferior quality, is not considered a fruit tree and thus you may be destroyed. No problem destroying a tree that's not really producing the kind of stuff you want it to produce, this Forno says. So, Bal Tashkit, this idea of being wasteful, is a prohibition. And according to the Rambam, this prohibition does not only apply to trees, but includes breaking utensils, tearing garments, destroying buildings, stopping up a spring. Oh, it doesn't like stopping up a spring. Okay, fine. Stopping up. Yeah, stopping up a spring. Um, or ruining food with destructive intent. All of those, a person would be liable to the punishment of Baltashi. Now, it happens to be, the Rambam also says, it's his opinion, that the punishment for Baltashkit is not a Torah punishment. It's not lashes from the Torah, but it is lashes, it's rabbinic lashes, which is somewhat different. It's not for now, but that's something to consider. Various reasons, including one tree ruining the quality of another, are given in the Talmud for allowing us to cut down a fruit tree. So that sometimes it's okay to cut down the fruit tree, including this reason of one tree is hurting another. There being more gain than loss might be another reason to allow cutting down a fruit tree. In other words, sometimes the value in the place, for instance, might be better than the value of the fruit that this tree grows, etc. There's other things to consider. Cutting down a tree for space needed is also allowed. Certainly, cutting off just one branch or branches would also be permitted. It's only the whole tree that's a problem. Transferring the tree elsewhere would also be allowed. Um, Again, says the Khatam Sofer, if one has a good reason to do so. Although there's an opinion that one who enjoys eating barley bread but eats wheat bread instead violates Bal Tashkit. There's an interesting Gemara like that. Or one who enjoys drinking beer but drinks wine instead violates Bal Tashkit. It's a waste. Why are you drinking these things if you don't like them? The Talmud in the standard version concludes that this is not the correct perspective. It's okay. It's not considered, in other words, bal tashchit, to eat something that you or didn't like. That's not bal tashchit. If you're disgusted by it, that's a different thing. At bal tashaktu, and we'll talk about that, God willing, in a future class. But after all, the prohibition against negatively impacting one's health takes precedence over thriftiness. Also, an important philosophy in terms of food. Okay, let's skip to chapter 21, verse 3 and verse 7. I think we have time for these, God willing. And it says, V'haya ha'ir, and it shall be that the city hakrova el hachalal v'lakhu zikne ha'ir ha'u hahi eglat bakar. So there's a halacha that, interesting halacha called egla rufa, which is what our parsha ends with. And you're probably wondering to yourself, what does this have to do with food? We'll see, God willing, in just a moment. So there's a dead body that's found between two cities, right? And the elders of the closest city, it's measured. You figure out which city is the closest to this person. They measure and they take an egla, a female cow from the flock. Asher lo ubad bada, that was never worked. Asher lo mashcha ba'ol, it was never had to pull anything by yoke. In other words, never worked a day in its life. Right? Lazy bum. So the comment here, what does it have to do with food? is that the case of the Egla Rufa is actually used as a source for this concept in the Gemara in Bava Batra of the difference between Rov and Karov. Rov meaning the majority, and Karov meaning what's a proximity, there's what's closest to it. So let's think of some cases where that might become relevant. You find recently, this is going to be very topical. I've never had them, but apparently a popular candy is called Skittles. And I guess recently some of them are kosher, some are not. You don't know which one's which. You find a pile of Skittles, okay? And you find a package of Skittles. You can't read the packaging to see if it's of the kosher kind or not. What can you do? So first of all, you might be able to rely on Rove. There's the majority. Whereas if you're in that store, and in that store, all of the packages, or the majority of the packages, but certainly if all, the majority of the packages are the kosher kind. They have the kosher lot number and et cetera, et cetera. And maybe they have the OU already. And you can't read on this package whether it has the OU or whether, or you can't read the lot number. Maybe it got erased from the sun or whatever. So you can rely on Rove. You can rely on the majority and say the majority of these Skittles packages are kosher. This is probably kosher too. Or another case, you've you're washing bins of lettuce. Let's say, right? You're washing bins of lettuce, washing, and you washed 5 bins of lettuce. And there's one you didn't wash. You go away for lunch, you come back from lunch, and now all 6 bins of lettuce are all together. Can you eat this lettuce now? And the answer is, if you're confident in the cleanliness of 5 of these bins of lettuce, and one of these bins of lettuce you're not sure about, you can rely on Rove, you can rely on the majority and say that it's kosher. That's Rove. Karov, meaning closeness or proximity, is situations where you have, for example, like what we had before. You had a piece of meat that is close to. There's 2 butcher shops. One's the kosher butcher shop, and one's the non-kosher butcher shop. Right? And the meat is found close to the kosher butcher shop. Closer. You measure and you see that it's closer. That's called karov. And that's taken from this idea, this halacha here, of the egla rufa. You measure, you have to physically measure what's closest, and then you can rely on that. In some cases, this is a big machloket, according to the Rishonim, Acharonim. There's a big argument about whether one is superior to another. For example, you might have a conflict. Let's say in that case of the meat, right? You have a conflict that it's closer to a kosher butcher shop. But the majority of butcher shops in that area are not kosher. You've got 10 butcher shops. 9 of them are not kosher. 1 of them is kosher. The meat is found closer to this kosher butcher shop. So can we rely on karov that it's closer to the kosher one, or do you have to rely on, or do you have to count on rove on the majority, and say, well, the majority are not kosher, so this piece of meat is probably not kosher also. So that's a famous sort of halachic discussion worth having that actually comes from this week's Parsha, according to the Gemara there in Bava Batra 23b. Next verse, chapter 21, verse 7, the last verse we'll learn for today. The sages, these rabbis, these elders from the town, they break the neck of this egla rufa. They kill it. They spill its blood. There's a whole ceremony, and then they say a prayer, and they say Va'anu v'amru, and they say, Yadenu, we know, lo shivcha or shivchu et hadam hazeh, ve'inenu lo ra'u. Our hands did not split this blood, and our eyes did not see. So what's going on here? What's what are what are these rabbis saying? I just realized that all this time I had it on a very small font. I apologize. So the elders of a city from which a wanderer left before he was killed are partly responsible for his death. Why? Because they did not make sure that he was provided with food and provisions. So Rashi says. So why are they at fault? They're the rabbis. Were they supposed to be in charge of the welcome committee? The actually not welcome, the opposite. The sayonara committee, the bon voyage committee. That's the rabbis. That's the elder's job. That's the rabbi's job. The answer is yes. Yes, maybe not the committee, but it's the rabbi's responsibility to teach to his community how important it is to be giving, and in particular of food and provisions. Now, this person probably did not starve to death. So what are we worried about? Are we saying, he was killed, he was murdered, this person? How would food have saved him? Is he supposed to like use his uh, French baguette as a weapon and beat away his attackers? What's one thing got to do with the other? And the answer is, the commentaries explain that if the attacker would have seen that this person was taken care of, that he was cared about, and he was given food, he was given provisions, then they would not have attacked him because they'd see, he's got somebody who cares about him. He's got somebody who's going to look into him. He's got somebody who's going to investigate and find out that I killed him, and then I'm going to be in trouble. This isn't just a nobody. There's I forgot now the name of the movie. A long time ago, there was a movie that was shown in terms of like medical ethics. There was a movie about I think it was with Gene Hackman, and it had to do with um, why did I think Hugh Grant was in there too? But anyway, whatever it was the point was that a doctor who needed to do these human experiments couldn't find human subjects, so was basically kidnapping homeless people. And the thought behind it is like what his thought. This is not correct, by the way. It's not the Jewish idea, but his excuse for this was, what's wrong with doing this? Who cares about these people anyway? They have no family, they have no loved ones. No one's going to care what happens to them, and they're contributing to science. Yeah, people are going to. I'm doing these experiments not to torture them, not to do anything bad, but
It wasn't that based on a true story, kind of. I mean, I've heard of like serial killers killing people that were like homeless on the street
yeah,
for
I
like
mean,
things.
yeah,
I mean, not really, not really.
that kind of thinking is nothing new. You're right. I mean, chas v'shalom. I mean, not it's not we're out of Av now. It's not Elul anymore. But and we're in Elul. It's not Av anymore. But it's worth mentioning that in the Holocaust, that's part of what they were doing in these concentration camps. They were doing medical experiments, terrible, awful medical experiments. By the way, not just Germans, but not just there, but the Japanese were doing terrible experiments in their camps where they had the Chinese and the American soldiers, etc. There are all kinds of terrible experiments that they were responsible for. Some of those experiments are very helpful if you don't look at the ethics behind them, right? The practically speaking, all kinds of medicines and therapies could be learned from these experiments. But the thought that these people aren't worthy of anything, so we can do whatever terrible, cruel thing we want to them for the sake of science. It's one thing for people to volunteer. The hunger experiments that were performed by in America during the 1940s during the war to see how long people can survive hunger. So that volunteers signed up for that. Actually, mostly conscientious objectors to the war. They signed up to be part of this, and this is, by the way, where we get most of what we know about calories and how many calories each food has. That comes from that experiment. So that's one thing. There's ethical questions about that as well. Don't get me wrong, but certainly certainly the idea that these people aren't worthy of anything, nobody cares about them, so we can do whatever we want to them. That that idea is so terrible. That's what this idea of the Egla Rufa is rooted in. This guy is whatever. He's traveling. He doesn't have family with him. He is all alone. But does anybody care about him? Well, look, he's got some French baguettes. Somebody's obviously taking care of him. Maybe he's going to his grandma's house in the forest, and Little Red Riding Hood or something. Who knows? But he's a somebody. He's got food. That's already something, and that's an important concept already. And I just wanted to point out, in case you didn't hear it before, in case you didn't, how many halachas did we go over in this short 1 hour class? Like we went the whole spectrum, right? We had halachot about Baal Tashchit, halachot about we talked about wastefulness. Obviously, we talked about taking care of the strangers. We talked about rove and karov and all kinds of important halachot in terms of halacha truma. Each parsha we'll see as we go through Tam Dagan, if we go through this cycle, this series, I think we'll learn that every single parsha is chock full of halachot that affect how we eat, why we eat, and how to best eat in a kosher, beautiful way. That's again in the honorable, respectful way that the Kohanim and Leviim would have to eat their truma. Thanks for listening. If there's
Man.
questions, I'll pause the
Oh,
live stream to Facebook, and